Good morning, everyone. So sorry about starting here a little bit late, a few technical difficulties. My name is Nick Exposito. I'm the Director of Marketing here at TriStar, and we're here to introduce today's webinar with Brian Inabnit, VP of Customer Success. We'll pause for questions at the end of the session today, so please just feel free to put those in chat. And without further ado, take it away, Brian. Sorry, everyone. We seem to be having a few more technical difficulties. Brian, can you hear me?
I can. Are you good? Can you guys hear me?
Yep, you're
Okay,
loud and
great.
clear. Thanks, Brian.
Great. All right, are we ready to get going?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay. So good morning, everyone. Sorry for the delay. Had a couple technical difficulties, as Nick was saying. So I want to jump right into it. Today we're going to be presenting the design documentation versus physical part management. This is similar to the presentation that I gave at the PTC user group a few weeks ago. And we're definitely going to go through a number of topics, and I'll try and get through those as quickly as we can so we can get into Q&A. So Corey, and I also have Corey Jones on the phone, who's a solution architect at TriStar and has experienced a lot of this in industry, and so he'll color commentate. And Nick, I don't know if you can unmute him. That would be great as well. And so really what we're going to be going through today is going through design documentation versus physical part management and the general practices around that. Oops, sorry. And really kind of the core fundamentals around CM2 paradigms and the principles that we're going to apply to this. And so then we'll also look at the collaborative design and quality validation and the effects of all of this on MBD MBE, as many of you are starting that journey for MBD MBE. So we'll go through some of that at the end, and then we'll get into Q&A and allow you guys to ask some questions. All right, so it's just real briefly on Corey's background. He came from NASA Johnson to us a few years ago, and he's had a lot of experience in different industries, a lot of experience with Creo and Windchill as well, and a number of other softwares that kind of lead into the physical part management. And so we'll get into that later in the presentation. So for those of you that don't know me, I'm the VP of Customer Success at TriStar. I've been here, as you can tell, for about 22 years. Been in the industry for about 30 years and have a lot of experience in a bunch of different areas around the topics that we're going to discuss today. So really, when you look at the digital thread and transferring that into the physical world, the common topic of discussion is transferring that documentation and managing all of that as we get in with our customers. And so one of the things that we want to kind of clarify with folks is how do you do that correctly? And so really, when you look at the digital thread, it really refers to the full management of the product development documentation, right? And so that includes manufacturing, quality. It includes a lot of different aspects of the product development cycle, really. Whereas the physical part management, it really exists for items like inspection, corrective action, inventory management, all of those things. And so as you kind of try and separate those things, it gets blurry as what do you do in a tool like Windchill to enable PLM, and what do you do and how do you connect that data to the physical part activities? And so that's really one of the challenges that customers face, is doing that. And so as you look at items in the part design and documentation, we're going to be looking at things like quoting and digital analysis, review and approval, design intent, where really physical parts going to be more about inventory, inspection, non-conformance, quality validation, and physical testing. And so as you look at that, really one of the key principles is that design change management is receiving and feeding both of these. And so obviously change management is a big part of making sure that you keep these two items connected correctly. And so one of the principles that we preach all the time is that drawing release does not equal part release. And we're going to be going through this in more detail on some later slides, but that's one of the key principles that we have to keep in mind. And that's a tough transition for most customers, is moving from drawing centric to part centric. And as I said, we'll talk through that. Okay, so really when you look at some of the major questions that come out of, so if you start to separate design management from physical part management, one of the initial questions is, how do you communicate to the stakeholders that own these physical part management activities that the design documentation is at a point where they could start doing something? Okay. And so we're very specific on how we communicate that with our best practices. And again, we'll go through that in some slides, the next few slides. So the next question is if you're going to really product planning and validation are separated from design documentation, how is the true part maturity communicated? Because it becomes a combination of both of those things from the design documentation and these validation steps. Okay. The last question we'll answer in this presentation is, how is the physical part data, and quality validation data connected back to the design documentation appropriately? And so there's a number of aspects around doing quality validation, but we'll kind of focus in on one today in the presentation. So really, as we're answering this, I want to give you guys some background and some best practices and industry best practices and beliefs that kind of add to this. And so really, one of the key things that we preach all the time is CM2 foundational principles. And so when you look at that, there are items like single source of truth, documentation, primary intent, part-centric documentation, and really this kind of lean closed loop processes. So as you look at CM2 and the pillars of those and those strong configuration management principles, these build up to obviously being able to do good governance and metrics. Okay. And so we'll talk through a few of these in detail, especially, documentation, primary intent, and part-centric, okay, during this presentation. So as you look at true part centricity, we're helping a lot of customers on this journey. And for those of you that have been involved with us in some of our assessments, you guys understand this philosophy. And so really we're trying to take people from a drawing centric, where really this drawing becomes the center of the world, right over here. We're really trying to take them to a point where the part is really the center of the universe. And all of this data is really describing that. And you're starting to remove stuff off of the drawing, which really leads to primary intent. You're removing things like manufacturing information, supplier information, procurement information, testing information, all that kind of stuff off of your drawings, because this drawing is really used to describe design intent and document the design, not all the other stuff that gets put on a drawing. Okay. And so this is one of the key principles for making sure, if you're going to separate out your part, your physical part management, you have to start moving towards part centricity. And so as you're moving there, one of the key things to help communicate to the rest of the organization are your life cycle states. And these are so important. We can't emphasize it enough. And making sure that everybody in the organization is aligned on what these states mean. So what you're looking at today is what we consider best practice life cycle states. So there's a couple other states that we may consider implementing in here, like concept state. Sometimes we put that in there for customers. But generally speaking, you need to have all of these states, and they don't have to be the same name, but what they do need to do is communicate the intent of what that state means. So the one we're going to focus on today to answer question number one is staging. So staging is a state, and by the way, we worked on these life cycle states, for those of you I haven't communicated this to, for months. And we had lots of internal debate to say what are going to be our best practice life cycle states. And so staging is one of those that we went round and round on. And really, the idea with staging is to communicate to the rest of the enterprise that, hey, engineering's pretty much done. We're ready for you guys to start looking at this. It also could communicate things in the physical part world. So if you're doing physical testing and prototyping and stuff like that, we can also add that kind of information to staging. And that's really where it starts to get ready for those downstream folks to start working on it. The key thing to understand is that in this state, the part is under revision control. So if you move in and out of this state, you're revising this part. Okay. And that's one of the key things. And so it's locked down from a design perspective. Okay. But when you look at the life cycle states before, this is not truly in production yet. Okay. So that's one of the key principles to understand. So answering question number two, if this product planning and validation are really separated from this, how does the true part maturity communicated? Because it becomes a combination of a number of things in Windchill to really do that. And so to give you guys some background on that, as you look for those of you that aren't familiar with CM2, I urge you, all of us at TriStar urge you guys to get familiar with this. And this, we can point you guys to this white paper. It's not too long and it's really a good read. And so what we did was extract some of the key principles and paradigms out of this and kind of, I guess, translate those into what we feel like they really mean. Okay. And so when you look at the first paradigm, and this happens a lot when we get into these discussions, is that, companies and employees assume that changes to documentation are too slow and that the physical items must change first. Okay. We see that all the time. And the CM2 principle is knowing documentation should always lead the physical items. And the physical items must conform to that documentation. Okay. So that means that if your process is perceived as slow or cumbersome, that's a good indication that your process is sub-optimized with the inappropriate change management activities. And so again, in our assessments, we're looking for this with you guys. And some of this is kind of anecdotal from as we communicate what best practice is and what you guys are experiencing in your change management. So the second key paradigm is that assuming designs can be developed independent of the process. And so again, the more process you utilize and do inside Windchill, you'll see these processes become more parallel. Okay, and that design can lead and processes follow. That is not true. And so the CM2 principle is knowing that product design and processes are interdependent, and they must be developed concurrently. And so again, this is often the mistake where, a monolithic workflow, and we'll talk about this in a couple of slides, it is developed, and you start intertwining a bunch of different activities like project management activities, quality validation activities inside of that process. Okay. So it's important to understand what are the boundaries of those processes. Okay. And again, we'll talk through this one in detail as well. So the next principle is that assuming each change will be the last. And as we all know, products ever evolve. You get input from your customers, input from manufacturing on how to make those products better, right? And it really becomes a CI effort for all product design. And so knowing that an organization will continually change and document better, right? This is the key principle, is knowing that's when organizations win, is when they're able to do that. And so design changes, we'll tell you, are inevitable, and it's paramount, right, in the process and efficiency to do this in a very predictable way. Okay. The next principle, the last principle, is assuming that the core business processes can perform efficient with change with no interaction with change management. And so the CM2 principle for this one is that knowing core business processes cannot perform reliably and efficiency without strong change management. Okay, and this is one of the key principles, and that we focus in on our assessments all the time. And so what we'll see is that when folks perceive that their processes are slow, again, that's a good indication that there's some type of sub-optimization, whether it's in the order in which it's doing, the activities that are taking place. It could be a number of items that we need to look for to help optimize these processes. Okay. So really, when you look at maximizing change management, and as I stated on a couple of slides before, a lot of folks will implement a monolithic type change management. So as you can see in this one, you're really introducing idea on concepts like quoting and prototyping, testing, and quality. Okay. So one of the challenges that we see all the time is as you're trying to improve typically project delivery time or time to market or one of those key business drivers, you really start to see that an improvement in small improvements in each of these areas don't really affect the process that much overall and don't give you the impact that most people expect it to. And so to do this right, you have to understand that project management and change management are not equivalent, okay? And that you can't embed project management in your change management and expect to get the improvement that can really be achieved when you do this properly. And so as you look at this, one of the key things that you need to be able to do is separate these project management activities, okay? And so as you separate those, you're also keeping those connected to your main change management trunk, which is what you see in the middle right here. This is what change management on design documentation should be. And so you see these ancillary processes like quoting and prototyping and testing, uh, a few of those which you can do anytime you want. Prototype and testing can be done when parts are in production, right, from a complaint from the field. So it doesn't make any sense for you to embed these in your life cycle states, and try and move back to a prototype state when something's in production and no design has changed yet. Okay. So you could run a prototype and figure out that you do need to do a change and that complaint from the field was validated. Okay. Or items like, quoting to your suppliers. You could quote to a supplier anytime. Okay. So that those need to be ancillary processes that are connected to your main change management. Okay. And so this will help you ensure the who, the what, the where, and why, and the how. Okay. And make sure that your processes are optimized. So the third question is, how is physical part data connected back to design documentation? And this is one that folks have struggled with for a long time. And adding systems only creates more complication. But we'll tell you is if you are doing things like this and you do have third-party systems that you're creating these processes and managing data in, it needs to be connected back to your main PLM system like Windchill. Okay, and so these various processes like inventory, inspection, NCMR, quality validation, and physical testing, these are some of the key physical part activities, right, that can be in other systems. Some of those can be done inside Windchill as well. One we'll focus on today is quality validation. And so if you're going to connect other things like inspection or have another application to do inventory inspection or NCMR, they need to be connected back to Windchill to do closed loop processes. Okay. And so when we look at, and in future webinars and white papers, we'll explain some of these other items like inspection, what we're doing to help connect that data to Windchill. Okay. So for today, we're going to go through quality validation. And so when you look really at, from a quality validation perspective, it's when do you start doing that quality validation? So depending on the process that you employ, right, first article or PPAP, you really need to start, that will help start dictating when you start these activities. Okay. And so when you look at a typical cycle, and it's a serial cycle, what we typically see is the what to build, the how to build, and validate the build, and the where and when become very serial. And so that it's very difficult, just like it was in your life cycle states, is to shrink that time to market if you don't start overlapping these items. Okay. And so this obviously is a whole organization. So it's all departments. All departments have to be on board with this idea of overlapping these types of functional activities. And so when you look at how it can be done, when you use these tools the right way, you can overlap the how to build it and the validation of the build. You can overlap those. The more you overlap, the shorter the time to market or project completion time goes. Okay. And so what we're going to help you understand here is how can you do that in a tool like Windchill and manage that data properly. Okay. And so obviously with these quality validation processes, like I alluded to, we see a lot of folks doing first article inspection. Um, you know, we do see quite a number of folks in different industries doing APQP and PPAP. And of course, those folks that are in med device, you're doing things like DHF, DMR, and you may even have an APQP and PPAP process on top of that. Okay. And so how do you do some of these things in Windchill? And again, we're going to focus on APQP and PPAP right now. So when you look at APQP and PPAP, these are some of the components that go in there, right? So you could have a number of checklists, you could have tracking of activities, right? You could be doing more risk assessment like DFMEAs, PFMEAs, control plans, all that kind of stuff, DVP and Rs. So you could be doing a lot of that other stuff, and it may be in other systems today. There is a Windchill risk and reliability module where you can do these things and connect them directly to the WT part, depending on what level of quality validation you need to be doing. And again, it's the same idea with first article from a process standpoint. Okay. So as you look at doing those kind of things in Project Link, really, that's the tool that we would recommend doing APQP and PPAP in Windchill. So this is a kind of a high level data model of how you would do those things. Okay. So when you look at APQP and PPAP, really you're trying to assess and drive quality into the product by doing upfront analysis. And then the PPAP is making sure that what you said you were going to do and what the expected results you were going to get, you get those. Okay. And so typically when you implement WT parts and structure, you'll have an end item like this that you're going to run an overall APQP and against. And in those, you'll have specific parts that require PPAPs. And then those parts actually may end up being to a supplier, and I'll show that on the next slide. But from an internal perspective, if you're running APQP and you're doing all your PPAPs on an internal parts, this is what the data model would look like. So you're going to take this data that lives in PDM Link, and you're going to share that data out to a project, and then you're going to make a project plan and a set of activities, okay, here that now have these items as deliverables. Okay. So in that, depending on what you're doing with your PPAPs, you can also have projects or sub-projects that now are connected to that overall APQP project and that plan. So what you're able to do then is status what's going on in these plans as well as the PPAPs to give you the overall status of where you are in your quality validation. So whether you're preparing that quality validation or you're executing that quality validation, you'll be able to see where you are. And so the combination of this, along with your change management and your maturing of your end items and your WT parts, you're able to get a true representation of how mature your product really is. Okay, parts and products are. And so when you look at it from a supplier's perspective, okay, this complicates things more, but I think this is traditionally what we're seeing today, where most companies aren't heavily vertically integrated, right? There's a few of you that we work with that are, and it makes it easier to actually implement this. But as you introduce suppliers, now you have this variable of how good is your supplier, right? And what level of quality validation data can they accept? How automated can they be? Okay. And so there's a variety of ways to work with your suppliers to even if they can only accept a drawing, we can still set it up. So if you have a supplier that's very advanced and can accept what we would call a QIF, which is an automated inspection file, versus a supplier that they can't look at 3D PDFs. They want 2D prints that they can print out, right? So we can accommodate both of those in Windchill. You can still run Project Link and project management with them. What you're delivering to them in the technical data package is a little different, right? And so that's where we need to understand your supply chain as well as your internal procedures and level of proficiency and technical aptitude, so we can figure out what's the best way to set this up now versus what's the best way to set this up for your future state. Okay, and then even to the point where we've helped customers educate their suppliers. Even interacting with these tools to make it easier for them to do something like this with their supply chain. Okay. And so when you look at this from an MBE perspective, right, if for those of you that are moving to model-based, this makes it even more challenging, right? So when you look at model-based definition, it doesn't just go across mechanical engineering and your CAD tool. It goes across all those core functions. And this is where I think most people that have tried to do MBD kind of fail, because they don't assess all of this and try and shoot for model-based engineering, which is really in model-based enterprise, which is where you need to go. Okay, so you've got these two levels above. If you're not planning for those levels as you're doing model-based definition, you'll never get to model-based engineering and model-based enterprise. So in your model-based definition, you have to be looking at these two, which goes into your extended value chain, like your supply base. Okay, because it's going to immediately affect what you do in MBD. Okay, and again, like many of you have seen, we will tell you that if you're going to do MBD and shoot for MBE, you have to be part centric. Okay. And so as you get kind of into the details of that, and as I mentioned before, and I know this is a bit of a busy slide, but many of you today, I think, understand and do this today, where you'll create a CAD model and a drawing. You have critical characteristics on those, and you manually take those critical characteristics out to a bill of characteristics for inspection. And so this is a very manual process. And there are some tools that can kind of help you create these Excel sheets. But again, these Excel sheets are very disconnected from your main product data, right? And it becomes a very manual process to manage that, to trend that data. And so really technology is advanced enough to make MBD realistic now, because we're able to do more of this in an automated way. There's standards that are being developed and standard file formats that can drive automated inspection, CMMs, and other things, other pieces of equipment like that. And so what we need to do, as if we're taking you guys on that journey, we have to inspect not only what you're doing internally, but what you're doing with your supply chain and how mature your supply chain is. Then we can determine what kind of data delivery, what kind of technical data package do those different suppliers need? What does your internal manufacturing need? Okay. And so this is a process that we have developed, so we can come in with you guys and figure out this long-term roadmap and how quickly can you really achieve MBE. Okay. We know it's not an easy journey. None of these are easy journeys. Part centricity is not an easy journey, and MBD and MBE is not an easy journey. But the return on investment is there if you do it right and you have the right processes aligned to it. Okay. And so managing the physical part, even items outside like supplier nonconformance, supplier corrective action, you can do all of that and connect all of that data in Windchill. Okay. So with the time left, I'd like to open it up to questions. I know at the technical summit we had quite a few questions, and they got pretty detailed, but they were really good discussion topics. So I was hoping to Nick, can we open up the floor to questions?
Yeah. So far, there are no questions have come in, but yeah, feel free to submit questions if you have them. There's a little question box at the top upper right-hand corner. Let's go ahead and click that. You can enter in your question, and we'll just answer them as they come. It looks like there's one come in right now from Kent. Is there a link to the PTC user presentation?
I can give you guys a link to that as well. Yes, all the slides that were in the PTC deck are in here as well. And Corey, while we're waiting on questions, I don't know if there's anything that you'd like to add to this from kind of your experience that you've seen, the journey that you took the guys at Kennedy on, and some of your other companies that you worked at.
Yeah, my experiences is this is kind of a difficult, scary jump or step, but we really started seeing the return on investment of the major PLM or Windchill system when we started implementing this across the board. There was a lot of difficulties um, from a standpoint of just all the different steps that you go through, but the return was quite significant once we started making those steps. If you go back one slide on the MBE slide, that's probably the most difficult, is not only just changing the drawing, but interpreting how that model or that definition is going to be used in all of these different domains or use cases. That was the step that was most difficult.
And to and what did you find was the best way to involve the rest of the organization and show them what worked for you guys?
It it started really returning when we had some both a standpoint of like a uh, I'm sorry, I'm blanking on it, but we went through one project, started that project from the cradle to the grave, down this and started really digging into it. It's overwhelming when you look at it as a whole, but we started it on a new system and then ran through each of the different domains as they came up. So
And so
taking a
did you find that like creating kind of proof of concepts or examples for folks, and identifying real, world use case scenarios that could have been avoided or whatnot? Was that approach you guys took that was
yes,
successful?
yes, that was the most successful when we started utilizing those real world examples, writing it through, developing it, um, and really getting that use case to drive it. So there was a little bit of overhead, but once we started down that, the return on the investment there was very rapid and extensive. Uh, there's a different mindset also of really looking at the requirements of what is the true root of requirement, not just this is the way we've always done it and let's repeat that method. So the question from a requirement standpoint was really what is the intent or the root requirement that we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, exactly. And
Looks
so,
like we. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Brian.
no,
I was
go ahead.
just we have a few more questions coming in. If you would like to answer a couple.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So it looks like we got another one from Kent. He says or asks, do most people align the drawing number of the WT part number or intentionally disconnect these?
So let's go back up to that slide. Sorry, I'm going to scroll on you guys a bit here. So this is always a topic of discussion. Um, sorry, I'm going. So really, when you look at it from the best practice perspective, and as you guys start getting into CM2 and really understanding that, so CM2 will tell you that every object should have its own unique number, and so this I think is very challenging for most customers. So if you look at the WT part, the drawing, and the CAD object, typically these have the same number. These two have an extension on the end of them, right? But as you look at the drawing and the number that's on the drawing, it's the same as the item master that's in ERP. Okay. So from a best practice standpoint, that's actually not what you should be doing. You should have a unique number for each of these. So I think, and Corey can shed some light on this too, based on the companies he's been at. We have a few customers that are doing that appropriately, but most customers are not. So if you're doing that today, right, and these numbers are the same, that really requires you to keep these in rev sync. Okay. But as I was explaining to a customer the other day, if you have unique numbers for these, if you have a business attribute that lives on this and you change that attribute, if they're all numbered the same, you need to revise them, but you didn't change the design at all. Okay. So this object right here, if you change that business attribute, you could actually rev this independently of these guys because they're not the same number. Okay. Now, obviously, if all of these are unique numbers, you have the challenge of making sure you educate your downstream folks internally, as well as your supply chain, that you're looking at a technical data package. You're not looking at one item. And that's where moving from this drawing centric mentality, when you move away from that, it makes sense that all these objects have different numbers, and it's okay that they do because you're looking at all of that data, the technical data package, right? Not just the drawing. And Corey, I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that.
Yeah, there's a lot of additional functionality that you can gain when you start separating the identification of the different aspects of the digital definition. So, as Brian was mentioning, if I go into a multi-owner, or if I have finish or other kind of color considerations, you can start extending some of those functions and efficiencies out. So, if we have one part that's painted three different colors, I don't have to create separate models and drawings for that, but I can identify those and document those through the additional WT parts. So there is some advantages. It depends on your business, but there's other key aspects there. And if anybody wants to reach out and just discuss those, that's not a problem.
So
Oh, we
hopefully
got
we
some more.
answered that one. Yeah, go ahead.
We got a question from Mario. Is an NPM link license required in order to create M-bombs from E-bombs?
Absolutely, yes. So we will tell you that I have seen customers in the past. Let me rephrase that. If you want those things to stay connected correctly and really utilize the power of Windchill, absolutely it is. So inside Windchill, obviously, and other tools, so say other tools like Agile or some of these kind of older PLM systems that don't have this capability, you could make another bomb, okay? And you could restructure that bill of material. You could add phantoms. You could add all kinds of stuff to it. The problem in doing that is those things don't stay in sync, okay? So that's where we'll tell you if you're going to do M-bombs, then do them the right way and use the right capability and functionality inside Windchill to do it. And that would require an NPM link license, yes. The bomb transformation capabilities.
We got another question from Kent. What about revisions? Do drawing and part have different revisions? Is using major and minor revisions a good strategy?
And Corey, I don't know if you want to you're welcome to take that one.
This can be answered in a couple different ways. I would recommend that they're different revisions. We have had some customers that have worked where the model and the drawing are the same revision, but not necessarily the WT part. From that standpoint, and if what Brian has on the screen right now, if the drawing and the model match revisions and the WT part does not, and I need to change the specification, then I don't need to do a change on the model or the drawing. I could go ahead, revise my WT part, revise the spec, or introduce a new spec, and I don't affect the model or the drawing. Where from a standpoint of parametric between the model and the drawing, that really makes it a little bit easier because I may need to change the model to change a drawing dimension or that, so that tends to be a little bit easier, but they necessarily don't have to. Um, there are a lot of considerations when they do. If they're all three are matching revision, you may be revising models and drawings where you do not actually change any of the fit or the form of the part, but I have in that example where I need to change out maybe the material spec, I would be revising a model and a drawing with no dimensional changes, and that can become cumbersome depending on the organization. I've seen a lot of people who are truly drawing centric trying to switch, and they get a drawing there's no dimensional change, only structure change or WT part, and it becomes a little bit confusing.
So that's stuff that we'll work through with you guys in detail as we do some of these assessments. And this is not something that we can do in a vacuum with just engineering. This is something the whole organization needs to understand and be on board with, right, Corey? Because if you're not, this doesn't work, right? We need
Exactly.
alignment, organizational alignment on this. Any other
Yeah.
questions?
The education there becomes uh, paramount. If you can educate the entire organization, um, realigning their focus on the WT part, then the success there, uh, the road to success becomes smoother. I'll put it that way.
Absolutely.
Great. Yeah, we have a couple more questions. One from Barry. General question: we are using Magic Draw to enable MBE. Are there interfaces to Windchill out of the box or custom? And do you have experience with Magic Draw with end users?
We do, and there are third-party applications that you can connect Magic Draw to Windchill, correct? And I'm assuming you guys are doing more MBSE, and so we're actually getting heavy into that. And as you kind of saw, we went down the other path, the other end of the spectrum, down into quality validation and manufacturing and that kind of stuff. But if you're going more upstream into requirements management and model-based system engineering, and how does that drive Windchill and product structure, right? And how do you trace that information properly and pass that information from your MBSE tool like Magic Draw into Windchill? Yes, those things are getting more and more automated. You'll see in the next few years that stuff's getting very connected into tools like Windchill. So yes, there is a third-party application that does that today. So we would say we need to assess what level of integration is really necessary, how the frequency, because that can change what we would recommend from an integration level. And Corey, I don't know if you want to add in. I know you did this in industry, so I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that.
Yeah, I've seen some of the customers move away from Magic Draw, moving more to Windchill Modeler, which it used to be RVNS. There's a lot of improvements around that tool, and then from a requirements management using CodeBeamer. So there is a PTC landscape there, but uh, using that SysML language, there can be some integrations.
Exactly. So if you guys don't choose to go down the PTC application path, that's okay. But again, we're still going to push you guys to connect that if appropriate, based on some of the things I mentioned before. And we can still help you guys connect that even with a third-party application the right way.
We got another question from Barry. You listed several parameters that are on drawings that could/should come off and maybe be an attribute on the part itself. Can you list those parameters again and elaborate on that approach?
Yeah, so actually I have another presentation that might be a little easier to see that. So we'll do that real quick. Let's see. Let's go to these guys. Oops, sorry for all the scrolling, you guys. So really, when you look at that, that's this guy here. Okay. So from a CM2 perspective, that's documentation primary intent. And I didn't list all of these, but so this is non-design data. So any non-design data it's not appropriate to have that on your drawing. And so those would include things like this. Okay. And so this would start to extend into specifications as well. Obviously, that you can, like Corey was saying, you can reference a spec, but having the true detailed spec on your drawing is what's not appropriate. That needs to be a document that is separate, right? And most of these things we're going to tell you need to be documents. So now items that have additional capability in Windchill, like handling your suppliers, right, and AML, AVL, that kind of information actually can be done in a different way in Windchill. There's core capabilities in supplier management that allow you to do that. So we would still advocate that there's items that may be on your drawings today that actually should not be as attributes on your WT part. So for example, things like supplier names, right? Supplier part numbers, those should not be on your drawing. They should not be attributes on your WT part. Okay. Because
I
those
would
are
even
things. Go
I
ahead.
would even challenge that the kind of switching the paradigm for a lot of my customers and even internally in some of the organizations that I was part of, that we were really going down, or I would suggest looking at it from a drawing and a model is the 3D definition. Everything else really should be on the WT part. So even material or finish and some of the other things that are typically inside or on the drawing, really challenge what's the right tool for that definition or defining that part. Do
Exactly.
you need to bring up Creo to change the paint color? Probably not. And utilize the WT part in the relationship to some other specification, and really driving or limiting Creo or your drawing to the 3D definition, the physical form of the part.
But then as folks move to WT parts, making sure that they have the appropriate attribution on those WT parts is also the kind of a next step, especially when you're doing MBD, MBE,
Right.
right?
Yep.
So
Exactly.
yeah, we see that pretty frequently, and actually have a pretty detailed questionnaire that we send folks through to understand some of the practices that you're doing today. But hopefully that answered some of your questions around what shouldn't be on the drawing. Now, when you move to the WT part, there's good best practices around what should and shouldn't be on the WT part as well. And so I think as the folks out there that, especially those of you that are admins in your Windchill system, it's critical that you start developing, a good detailed data model for what Windchill really looks like, and that runs down all the way to the attribution on your WT parts, on your CAD, on documentation in Windchill, whatever it may be. Okay. So it's very critical that you guys develop that and have everybody in your organization understanding what does your detailed data model look like? And that's where we can help you say what's appropriate, what's the best place to put that data, especially from a change management perspective. And that's what you're always going to feel is pushback to is change. Okay.
We got another
Any other?
question from Mike. Yeah, our products are very software centric. With this approach, are there best practices for how to manage software in Windchill?
Absolutely. And there are AML applications that you can use in the Windchill suite of products to manage software source code, and integrate that into your Windchill bill of material structure, so that you have items that are on your BOM that represent software or firmware are on there, but they're managed appropriately in the other tools. You can integrate other tools like Subversion, GitHub. All of those tools can be integrated into Windchill as well. So yes, this extends out to software. And Corey, I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that from a software perspective. I know he had another meeting, he may have had to jump, but that's something that we can discuss with you guys as well. But yes, this does extend into the software
Oh, we got
management as
another
well.
question here from when the technical design package and the drawing are different numbers, how do you normally label the physical parts?
Um, the physical, oh, I see. So that collection of data together. So typically that collection is typically represented at the WT part level. So whatever number that is, the technical data package is that typically that number. So, with some kind of understanding that it's a technical data package. And so some of those we're actually even for a couple customers, we're actually embedding all of the other ancillary data into the 3D PDF. We've done that as well. And so the 3D PDF, which is the part number itself, actually becomes the technical data package. So again, it depends on how you're delivering that and who you're delivering that to. That can depend. And then are you appending information to that number? So a lot of folks want to, as they send out a technical data package, they're appending the revision of the part record itself to the technical data package. So again, it varies, but yes, there are best practices around that.
All right, we got one last question from Steve. How would you handle software updates?
So from a source code management, obviously that's done in the source code management tool, whatever that may be, whether it's PTCs or you're using something else. But from a update like a change management perspective, so it would follow the typical process that a part record does inside Windchill, because you're going to attach that deliverable, whether it's in code, you're going to attach that to the WT part that's in your bill of material. So it's going to follow the typical change management processes. So if there's items that need to be updated, in the code, you're revising that part record that represents that final code that's sent out, whether it's firmware or software. Hopefully that answered your question.
That looks like that is it for questions.
Great. Well, I think that's the time, and we really appreciate everybody attending today. We will send this presentation out to you guys through a link that you can download this deck. Again, it has all the slides that were in the PTC user deck, so I don't think you need both of those. So please feel free to respond with any questions that you guys may have, and we'll do our best to answer those.
Yeah, I just want to thank everybody again for their patience. Sorry for starting a little late and our technical difficulties. Everyone who has registered for this webinar will be sent a link to watch the whole presentation in full. Also, you can follow us on YouTube and visit tristar.com, where this webinar will also be posted later this afternoon. Thanks, guys.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.